The lion's roar shook the entire building. Every single one of Jin's men froze. 30 armed guards, all trained killers, all dressed in sharp black suits, and not one of them could move. Their guns were raised, their hands were shaking, and their eyes were wide like little kids who had just seen a ghost. But Jin didn't move. He stood right there in the middle of his own penthouse, the most powerful man in all of Seoul, and stared at the giant golden lion that was now standing between him and the most beautiful girl he had ever seen in his life. The lion was huge. Its golden fur glowed under the bright lights. Its yellow eyes were locked on Jin like he was dinner. A low growl rumbled deep in its chest, so powerful that Jin could feel it in his bones. And the girl? She had one hand resting on the lion's back, calm as someone watching clouds float by. Her dark skin glowed under the penthouse lights. Her natural hair was pulled up high. She wore a simple white dress covered in dust and a little bit of blood, though Jin couldn't tell yet if the blood was hers. She looked Jin straight in the eyes and said, very quietly, "Call off your men, or Simba will call them off for you." Jin had faced drug lords. He had survived 3 assassination attempts. He had walked into burning buildings without blinking. But nothing had ever made his heart beat like this. He raised one hand slowly, and his men lowered their weapons. What happened in the next 60 seconds would change his life forever. But to understand why this girl was standing in his penthouse with a lion at midnight, we have to go back to where it all started. Where are you watching this from? Drop your country in the comments. We love seeing our global family. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now because this story only gets crazier from here. Jin Park was not a good man. He knew it. Everyone in Seoul knew it. His real name was Park Jin-Ho, but on the streets, people just called him the Wolf. He ran the most powerful criminal organization in South Korea, the Dragon Brotherhood. They controlled everything: smuggling, black market deals, protection rings, and more. If money moved illegally through Seoul, Jin got a cut of it. He was 29 years old, sharp-jawed, cold-eyed, and dressed like he owned the world, because honestly, he kind of did. Jin lived in a massive glass penthouse on the 40th floor of a tower in the heart of the city. He had 17 cars, 4 private planes, and a chef who flew in from Paris every week just to make him breakfast. He had never been arrested. He had never lost a fight. He had never, ever lost control of a situation. His second in command was a quiet, sharp man named Kong, short hair, always wore glasses, always 3 steps ahead of everyone. His head of security was a tall woman named Director Yoon, who had once taken a bullet for Jin without even flinching. Life was clean, controlled, cold. Then came the auction. Every year, the criminal underground of Asia held something called the silent market. It wasn't advertised. You didn't Google it. You got an invitation, a small black card with a gold dragon on it, and if you got one, you showed up. No questions asked. The silent market sold rare things. Very rare things. Jin went every year, not because he needed anything, but because power meant staying informed, staying seen, letting other people remember who he was. This year, the market was held in an old converted warehouse near the Han River. Red lights, cigarette smoke, men in expensive suits whispering deals in dark corners. Jin moved through the room like a shark through water, smooth, quiet, dangerous. He was about to leave early when he heard it. A commotion near the back of the warehouse. Shouting. The sound of metal crashing. And then, a sound that made every single person in that warehouse stop breathing. A lion's roar. Jin pushed through the crowd and found himself looking at a massive iron cage. Inside was a young lion, maybe 2 years old, golden and gorgeous and absolutely furious. It was slamming its body against the bars, roaring so loud that the red lights flickered. And crouched just outside the cage, her fingers pushed through the bars, was a girl. She was whispering to the lion in English. Soft words, gentle sounds. The lion's roaring slowly softened. Its amber eyes found hers. It pressed its big head against her hand through the bars. The auctioneer, a sweaty man in a gray suit, grabbed the girl's arm and yanked her back. "Don't touch the merchandise," he snapped in Korean. The girl spun around. She was maybe 22, 23 years old. Dark brown skin, sharp eyes filled with fury, and a jaw set so tight that Jin could see she was holding herself back from doing something she'd regret. She said in careful Korean, "This lion is sick. He has a fever. If you put him in another transport crate tonight, he will die before morning." The auctioneer laughed. "Not my problem, sweetheart. He sells tonight." The bidding started. Jin watched. He watched the girl pace back and forth at the edge of the crowd, her arms crossed tight, her eyes never leaving the lion. He watched her pull out her phone, make a call, put it away with shaking hands. He watched her look at the exit, then back at the cage, then at the exit again, like she was calculating something. She's going to do something stupid, Jin thought. He was right. When the bidding hit 40 million Korean won, the girl did something that made Jin's jaw nearly drop. She walked straight up to the auctioneer, pulled a small envelope from her bag, and slapped it on his table. 50 million, she said. In cash. Right there. The room went dead silent. The auctioneer stared at the envelope. I opened it. Counted. His eyes went wide. Jin stared at the girl. Who carries 50 million won in cash to an underground auction? The lion was hers. But the moment she started moving toward the cage, 3 large men in black stepped in front of her. They worked for the man who'd just been outbid. A Russian dealer named Petrov, known for being a very sore loser. The lion doesn't leave, one of the men said quietly. Our boss wants it. The girl looked up at the 3 men. She didn't back away. She didn't call for help. She just said, "You have 5 seconds to move." The men laughed. They stopped laughing when the lion's cage door, which the girl had quietly unlatched during the distraction, swung open. What happened next was pure chaos. The lion walked out slow and calm, straight to the girl's side. She put her hand on his mane. The 3 men scrambled backward, so fast one of them knocked over an entire table of champagne glasses. Half the room ran for the exits. The other half pressed themselves against the walls. Jin didn't move. He watched the girl walk toward the exit with the lion beside her like she was walking a very large, very dangerous dog. She was almost out the door when Petrov himself stepped forward, red-faced and furious, with 6 armed men behind him. You're not leaving with my lion, Petrov said. He was never yours, the girl said. Petrov nodded to his men. Jin moved before he even made a conscious decision to. He stepped between Petrov's men and the girl. Just stepped right in. His 2 bodyguards materialized on either side of him instantly. The deal was legitimate, Jin said to Petrov, in Russian, cold and flat. She outbid you. It's done. Petrov stared at him. The whole room held its breath. Everyone knew who Jin was. And everyone knew that crossing the wolf was not something you did and walked away from easily. Petrov backed down. Slowly. Furiously. But he backed down. Jin turned to look at the girl. She was staring at him. Not with relief, not with gratitude, but with those sharp, measuring eyes, like she was trying to figure out what he wanted. I didn't ask for your help, she said. No, Jin agreed. You didn't. She studied him one more second. Then she walked out into the night with her lion. Jin stood there and watched her go. Kong appeared on his shoulder. Should I find out who she is? Jin was quiet for a long moment. Yes, he finally said. Her name was Amara. Amara Diallo, 23 years old, originally from Accra, Ghana, now living in Seoul on a wildlife research visa. She worked with an international animal rescue organization that specialized in exotic animals taken from illegal trades. She had a tiny apartment on the south side of the city, 3 university degrees in zoology and animal behavior, and apparently 0 fear of lions, or Korean Mafia bosses. The lion's name was Simba. She had rescued him 18 months ago from a smuggler in Thailand. He had been a cub then. Now, he was 160 kilograms of pure muscle. Keeping a lion in Seoul was technically illegal. Amara had permits. Very creative, very specific permits. Jin's legal team reviewed them and concluded she existed in a strange gray zone that was almost legal if you didn't look too hard. Jin had her information for 4 days before he did anything with it. He didn't know why he waited. He didn't need her for business. She wasn't a threat. She wasn't useful. She was just a girl with a lion who had looked at him like she already knew exactly who he was and had decided it wasn't very impressive. He found that deeply, disturbingly interesting. On the 5th day, he got a call from Kong. "Sir, there's a problem." "What kind?" "The girl, Amara." Petrov found her apartment. Jean was already standing before Kong finished the sentence. "Send a team."
"Now."
"Sir, the team we sent 20 minutes ago? They're not answering their phones." Jean blinked. "What?" "And sir, there's something else. Building security just called. There's a girl in the lobby. She says she needs to speak to you. She has the lion with her." Jean closed his eyes for 1 second. Then he almost smiled. And that is how Amara Diallo ended up standing in Jin's penthouse at midnight, her hand on Simba's back, staring down 30 armed men like it was nothing. "Call off your men," she had said. "Or Simba will call them off for you." Jin raised his hand. His men stood down. Amara looked at him, really looked at him, and said, "Petrov's men came for me tonight.
6 of them.
Simba handled 4. I handled 2. But he'll send more." "I know," Jean said quietly. "I don't want your protection," she said. "I want information. I want to know where Petrov's base is, so I can get ahead of this." "You want to go after Petrov yourself?" I didn't stutter. Jean stared at her. Behind him, he could hear Kong make a small sound that was absolutely not a laugh. "And if I don't give you that information?" Amara tilted her head. Simba's golden eyes moved slowly from her face to Jin's face. The lion made a sound low, deep, a vibration more than a roar, that somehow said everything. Jin made a decision right then that he couldn't fully explain, not even to himself. He pulled out his phone and sent Kong a text with 2 words, "Give her everything." Amara watched him. "Why?" she asked. "Because," Jin said, sliding his phone back into his pocket, "anyone who walks into a Mafia penthouse with a lion and calls it a plan deserves to win." For the first time since he'd seen her, something flickered in Amara's eyes. Not a smile, not yet, but something close. Simba sat down between them like a giant golden referee. And somewhere deep inside Jean Park, the wolf, the most feared man in Seoul, something cracked open just a little. Neither of them had any idea what was coming next. Simba had not moved. The giant lion was still sitting right between Jean and Amara, like he had personally decided he was the security guard of this conversation. His tail swished slowly across the expensive marble floor. His amber eyes moved back and forth between the two of them, calm and steady, like he was watching a tennis match and waiting to see who would make the first mistake. Jin's men were still frozen near the walls. 30 trained killers, and not one of them knew what to do, with a lion sitting in the middle of their boss's penthouse like he owned the place. Kong pushed his glasses up his nose and typed something quietly on his tablet. He was the only person in the room who looked even slightly relaxed, but that was Kong. He could look relaxed at a funeral. Amara finally broke the silence. "I need to see the information tonight," she said. "Not tomorrow. Tonight. Petrov now knows where I live. He knows about Simba. He'll upgrade his approach next time. More men, tranquilizer guns, maybe worse." "Tranquilizer guns won't stop Simba," Jean said, before he could stop himself. Amara looked at him sharply. "How do you know that?" "Because you're still alive," he said simply. If tranquilizers worked on him, Petrov's men would have used them in Thailand when they first caught him. But they didn't. Which means either Simba has unusual resistance, or he's too fast for a clean shot. Amara was quiet for exactly 3 seconds.
"Both," she said.
Jean nodded slowly. "Sit down. I'll have Kong pull everything we have on Petrov's Seoul operation. I'll stand. Suit yourself." He turned and walked to his main desk, a massive slab of black glass overlooking the glittering Seoul skyline. Kong was already pulling up files on the wall screen. Maps. Photos. Names connected by red lines like a spider web. Amara moved to stand beside Jean, close enough to see the screen clearly. Simba padded silently behind her and lay down at her feet like a very large, very intimidating rug. Jin's head of security, Director Yoon, stepped forward and leaned close to his ear. "Sir," she murmured, "this is highly irregular." "I know," Jin murmured back. "She walked in here with a lion. I noticed. We don't know who she's working with. She could be." "I know, Yoon." Director Yoon pressed her lips together and stepped back. She had worked for Jin for 6 years. She knew that tone. It meant the decision was already made. Kong pulled up the first file. A photo of Petrov, heavy-set, gray-bearded, always in a fur coat even in summer, like he wanted everyone to remember he was Russian.
Viktor Petrov, Kong said.
54. Former military intelligence. Now runs the largest exotic animal smuggling network in Eastern Asia. He moves products, animals, through 3 main ports, Busan, Incheon, and 1 location that we haven't confirmed yet. Amara leaned forward. Her eyes moved across the screen fast, like she'd read maps like this before.
"That 3rd port," she said.
"Is it inland? On the river?" Kong looked at her sideways.
"Possibly."
"Why?" "Because Petrov always keeps a water exit. He did the same thing in Bangkok. And in Ho Chi Minh City." She crossed her arms. "I've been tracking him for 2 years." The room got very quiet. Jin turned to look at her. "You've been tracking Viktor Petrov for 2 years?" "Yes." "Alone?" "My organization knows. But field work is mostly solo." "That's either very brave or very foolish." "My mother says the same thing," Amara said, without even blinking. Jin almost smiled. He stopped himself. "What do you actually want, Amara?" he asked. "Not the files. Not the maps. The real answer." She looked at him steadily. "Petrov has 12 animals in holding right now. 3 snow leopards, 2 chimpanzees, 4 rare parrots, and 3 lion cubs. Real cubs, maybe 8 weeks old. They were taken from a reserve in Kenya 3 weeks ago." Her voice stayed even, but something moved behind her eyes. Something fierce and deep. "I want them back. All of them. And I want Petrov's Seoul operation shut down completely, so he can't rebuild here." Jin studied her. "And Petrov himself?" "That's your world, not mine," she said quietly. "I rescue animals. What happens to him is not something I'll lose sleep over." Kong made another small sound behind his tablet. It was definitely not a laugh. Absolutely not. Jin sent most of his men out of the room. He kept only Kong, Director Yoon, and 2 guards near the door. Then, and this surprised even him, he sat down across from Amara at the low table near the window and started actually talking to her. Not interrogating. Not negotiating.
Talking.
He asked her about Simba. She told him everything. How she found him in a tiny wooden crate in a Bangkok back alley, barely 4 months old, severely dehydrated, with a broken rib. How she'd nursed him back to health over 6 weeks in a rented house in Chiang Mai. How she'd hand-fed him. How the first time he'd purred, a sound like a motorcycle engine, she had burst into tears in a way she hadn't cried since her father died. Jin listened to every word. He didn't normally listen to people. He processed them, their usefulness, their loyalty, their threat level. Listening, real listening, was something he'd stopped doing years ago. It was a weakness. Weakness got you killed in his world. But he listened to Amara. And somewhere in the middle of her telling him how Simba had once stolen an entire roast chicken off her kitchen counter and looked absolutely not guilty about it, Jin laughed. A real laugh. Short and surprised, like it escaped before he could catch it. Amara stopped talking and looked at him like she'd just seen something unexpected. Like she'd been watching a stone statue suddenly blink. "Sorry," Jin said, composing himself. "Don't apologize," she said. "It's just, you look different when you do that." "Do what?" "Look like a person." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was something else entirely. Something neither of them quite had a word for yet. Simba lifted his big head, looked at Jin, and made a low rumbling sound that was almost gentle. "He doesn't do that with strangers," Amara said, sounding genuinely surprised. "Maybe he knows I'm not a threat," Jin said. "Or maybe," Amara said slowly, "he knows something I don't yet." It was nearly 3 in the morning when Kong knocked softly and stepped into the room. His face was very still. Jin knew that face. That was Kang's bad news face. "We have a problem," Kong said. "What kind?" Kong looked at Amara, then back at Jin. "Petrov didn't just send men to her apartment tonight. He sent a message to every major criminal network in Seoul. He's offering a reward." A pause. "For her." Amara went very still. "How much?" she asked quietly. Kong hesitated. "Kong," Jin said. 500 million won, Kong said.
Alive.
He was alive. The number hung in the air like smoke. 500 million won. That was enough to make even loyal men think twice. That was enough to make enemies out of people who had never met Amara Diallo in their lives. Director Yoon looked at Jin.
"Sir."
"Every bounty hunter, every freelance crew, every mid-level gang in Seoul is going to be looking for her by sunrise." Jin stood up slowly. His jaw was tight. "Then she doesn't leave before sunrise," he said. Amara shot to her feet. "Excuse me, I'm right here, and I make my own—" "I know you make your own decisions," Jin cut in, and his voice was not harsh, but it was very firm. "And I'm asking you to make the smart one. You go out there right now, you won't make it 2 blocks. Not with half of Seoul's underground looking for a $500 million payout." Amara stared at him. Her hands were balled into fists at her sides. Simba stood up behind her, reading her tension perfectly, his massive body suddenly rigid. She hated that Jin was right. Jin could see it on her face, the moment she processed it, and hated it. "One night," she said finally, through gritted teeth. "I stayed one night. At sunrise, I move." "At sunrise," Jin agreed.
She pointed at him.
"And don't get any ideas." "I have a great many ideas," Jin said calmly. "Most of them are about how to dismantle Petrov's network before he gets to you first." Amara searched his face for a long moment. Then she exhaled slowly and sat back down. Simba, satisfied, lay back down across both their feet. Neither of them mentioned that. What none of them knew, not Jin, not Kong, not even the ever-watchful Director Yoon, was that one of Jin's 30 guards had already sent a message. A small, quiet message to a contact they shouldn't have had. The message contained 2 words and a photo taken discreetly from across the penthouse. The 2 words were, "She's here." And the photo was of Amara. By sunrise, it wouldn't just be bounty hunters looking for her. It would be someone far, far worse. The message had already been sent. Somewhere in the city, a phone buzzed. A pair of cold eyes read 2 words and looked at a photo of Amara's face. Thin lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. A single instruction was typed back: "Don't let her leave." And in Jin's penthouse, 40 floors above the sleeping city of Seoul. Nobody knew any of this yet. Amara didn't sleep. She sat on the long cream sofa near the window with Simba's huge head resting across her lap, her fingers moving slowly through his mane. The Seoul skyline glittered below her like scattered diamonds. It was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often are, all shine and no warmth. She watched Jin. He was across the room at his desk, still working. Jacket off, sleeves rolled up, going through Petrov's files with Kong like it was the middle of the afternoon and not 4 in the morning. He moved through information quickly, pointing, dismissing, circling back. She could tell he had a sharp mind. Not just street smart. Actually sharp. The kind of sharpness that came from years of reading people and situations and never, ever getting it wrong. She didn't trust him. She wasn't built to trust people quickly. Her work had taught her that the most dangerous creatures were often the ones that looked the most controlled. But she watched him, and she thought, he genuinely wants to take Petrov down. Not for her. She wasn't naive enough to believe it was for her. But for his own reasons, territory, pride, power, whatever it was real. And right now, real was useful. Simba made a low sound in his sleep.
His paw twitched.
"He's dreaming," Jin said, without looking up from his desk. Amara blinked. "You're watching us?" "I notice things," he said simply. "It's how I stay alive." She looked back down at Simba. "He dreams about the savannah, I think. He's never been there. He was born in captivity. But sometimes I wonder if animals remember things in their blood that their eyes have never seen. Jean was quiet for a moment. Then, I think people do too. She looked up at him. He was still looking at the screen, but something in his face had shifted. Something quieter. She decided not to pull on that thread. Not tonight. At 5 in the morning, Kong made coffee, real coffee, not the instant kind, and brought 3 cups to the table. He set one in front of Amara without being asked. She looked at it, then at him.
"Thank you," she said.
"You're welcome," Kong said, precise and polite. Then quietly, so only she could hear. "For what it's worth, he hasn't laughed like that in about 3 years." Amara said nothing, but she wrapped both hands around the warm cup and stared at the steam rising from it. At 5:47 in the morning, everything went wrong. It started small. The kind of small that you almost miss. Director Yoon stepped out of the room to take a call. Normal enough, she handled communications all night. But she was gone longer than usual. 6 minutes.
7. 8.
Kong noticed at minute 9. He looked at Jean. Jean was already looking at the door. At minute 10, the lights went out. Not a flicker. Not a surge. Total darkness. All at once. Like someone had simply erased the light from the world. Simba was on his feet before any human in the room had even processed what happened. A sound came out of him, not a roar, something lower and more serious than a roar, a sound that meant danger is here, and it is close. Kong. Jin's voice came through the dark, completely calm. "Count. 2 guards at the door are not responding," Kong said immediately. He had a small tactical light on in seconds. "Building security feed is dead." Someone cut the main line from inside. "Inside," Jean repeated. One word. But the weight of it filled the whole room. Someone inside his organization had done this. Amara was already on her feet. She couldn't see much, just the small pool of Kang's light and the massive golden shape of Simba pressed against her left side. She kept one hand on his flank. His muscles were coiled tight as a spring. "How many exits?" she asked Jean quietly. 3, he said, appearing at her side from the darkness. He had a gun in his hand now. She didn't know where it came from. It was just suddenly there. 2 are almost certainly covered. The 3rd is a service elevator that only I have the override code for. "Almost certainly," she repeated. "Nothing is certain right now," he said. Not panicking. Just honest. She respected that. "Then we move," she said. "We move," he agreed. They moved through the dark penthouse in a tight group. Jean leading, Kong covering the rear, Amara and Simba in the middle. Simba moved with terrifying silence for an animal his size. His eyes caught the faint emergency light from the city outside the windows and glowed like 2 small suns. They were halfway to the service corridor when they heard it. Footsteps. Multiple sets, coordinated, coming from the main corridor to the left. And then a voice. Jin-Ho. It was a woman's voice.
"Come."
Almost warm. The kind of voice that had learned to sound safe, specifically, because it wasn't. Jean stopped walking. Amara looked at his face in the faint light and saw something she had not seen on him before. Not fear, something older than fear. Recognition. And with it, something that looked painfully like betrayal. "You know that voice," Amara said under her breath. His jaw tightened. "Yes." "Who is it?" A pause that lasted exactly 1 second too long. "Her name is Seo-Hoon," he said. "She ran the Dragon Brotherhood before me." Amara stared at him. "She ran your organization?" "She built it," Jean said quietly. "I took it from her 5 years ago." The silence after that sentence was very loud. "And you didn't think," Amara said, keeping her voice extremely controlled, "to mention that a woman who built a criminal empire and lost it to you might be a problem?" "I thought she was in Tokyo." "Clearly she is not in Tokyo." "Clearly," Jean agreed. Hoon stepped into the dim light at the end of the corridor. She was maybe 45, slim, dressed in a dark coat, her black hair pulled back sharply. She looked like a professor or a diplomat, the kind of woman you'd see giving a quiet speech at an important meeting. She had the stillness of someone who had never needed to raise her voice because everyone always listened to the first word. She looked at Jin with something that might have been affection in a different life. Then she looked at Amara. So this is her, Hoon said softly. The girl with the lion. Her eyes moved to Simba. She didn't flinch, but she was very careful not to move either. I thought Petrov was exaggerating. Why are you here, Hoon? Jin said. I came for the girl, she said simply. Petrov's reward is generous, but that's not the real reason. She tilted her head. The real reason is that she has something I need. Information. 2 years of tracking Petrov's network. Her eyes moved back to Amara. I've been trying to build a case against him for 18 months. Quietly. Through channels that can't be traced back to me. You could have called, Jin said flatly. You would have hung up, she said, and it wasn't an accusation. Just a fact. I needed her information, and I needed you not to interfere. So I arranged to get her here, where I could speak to both of you at once. Amara's voice was very careful. You arranged. You mean, you're the one who told Petrov where my apartment was. The silence confirmed it before Hoon even spoke. I needed you off the board, and somewhere controlled, Hoon said. I didn't expect Jin to step in at the auction. That was a faint, genuine pause. Unexpected. Amara felt cold fury move through her chest like ice water. She had been maneuvered. Like a chess piece. Like one of Petrov's animals, moved from one cage to another. Simba felt it. His growl started low and built slowly, filling the corridor like thunder rolling in from far away. Hoon took one very small step backward. Jin looked at Amara. And for a moment, just a moment, something passed between them. An understanding. Because whatever Hoon had done, whatever game she was playing, she had also just handed them something important. She wasn't here to hurt Amara. She was here because she needed her, which meant Amara had leverage. You want my 2 years of data on Petrov, Amara said, her voice going very quiet and very steady. His routes. His contacts. His holding locations. Yes, Hoon said. And in exchange, I can make Petrov's bounty on you disappear within 24 hours. I have people he trusts. I can also get you safe passage out of Seoul for the animals, all 12 of them. Amara went very still. 12 animals. The snow leopards. The chimpanzees. The lion cubs. Her throat tightened. She looked at Jin. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were on her, steady and waiting. Not pushing. Not deciding for her. Just present. She made a decision. I'll give you the data, Amara said to Hoon. Every file. Every route. Everything. Hoon almost smiled. Wise. On one condition, Amara cut in. Hoon waited. We do this together. All 3 of us. Tonight. We go to Petrov's holding facility, we get those animals out, and then and only then you get your data. The corridor was absolutely silent. Hoon looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Jin. Jin shrugged. You heard her. Hoon exhaled slowly through her nose. You walked into a Mafia penthouse with a lion, she said. I should have expected this. Yes, Amara said simply. You should have. Simba sat down between all 3 of them, tail swishing once. And somewhere across the city, in a cold warehouse by the river, 12 animals had no idea that the most unlikely rescue team in the history of Seoul was about to come for them. But the night was not done with its surprises. Because as Kong quietly checked his phone, his face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds, something Amara had never seen from him before. He looked up at Jin. Sir, Kong said. Petrov isn't at his facility. Where is he? Kong turned the phone screen around slowly. On it was a live security feed. A familiar building. A familiar lobby. He's here, Kong said. He's in this building. Ground floor. And he has 20 men with him. The elevator at the end of the corridor dinged softly. Simba stood back up. The elevator dinged again. Nobody moved. The small number above the elevator doors glowed amber in the darkness. Ground floor. Then 2. Then 5. Then 10. Petrov was coming up. Jin counted silently in his head. 40 floors. At this speed, maybe 4 minutes. Maybe less if someone overrode the elevator speed control from below. He looked at Haun. She looked back at him. For one strange second, 5 years of history dissolved between them. The betrayal, the power struggle, the Cold War that had never fully ended, and they were just two people who were very good at surviving, staring at a problem that required both of them. Options, Jean said. Service elevator. Haun said immediately. You said you have the override. He'll have men watching the parking structure below. Roof, Amara said. Both Jean and Haun looked at her. The roof, she repeated. You have 40 floors of height. Petrov came from the ground. He's thinking ground, exits, streets, cars. Nobody runs to the roof unless they have a way off it. She looked at Jean. Do you have a way off it? Jean looked at Kong. Kong was already typing. The emergency helicopter pad is active. The bird is fueled. It hasn't moved since Tuesday. Then we go up, Amara said, like it was the simplest thing in the world. Jean made the call in under 2 seconds. We go up. They moved fast and quiet through the dark penthouse, up a private stairwell that smelled like concrete and cold air. Jean led. Haun took the left flank. Kong covered the rear with his tablet still open, monitoring the elevator feed with one eye. Simba moved between all of them like liquid gold, silent, massive, perfectly calm. Amara had one hand resting on his back. She could feel his heartbeat through her palm.
Steady.
Focused. He wasn't afraid. He was ready. 32nd floor. Kong murmured from behind. He's moving fast. Someone gave him an elevator override access. Someone inside, Jean said. Director Yoon, Haun said quietly. Jean didn't turn around. You knew. I suspected. She was my person originally, Jean. Before she was yours.
A pause.
I didn't know she'd go this far. Jean said nothing. His jaw was tight enough to cut glass. They hit the roof door at a run. The Seoul night hit them like a wall. Cold, sharp, smelling of rain that hadn't fallen yet. The city spread out in every direction, glittering and enormous and indifferent. The helicopter sat in the center of the pad, blades still, waiting. Kong was already calling the pilot before the roof door fully closed behind them. 2 minutes, Kong said. We don't have 2 minutes, Haun said. She was right. The roof door burst open 30 seconds later. 4 of Petrov's men spilled through first, big, fast, tactical gear, weapons up. They spread immediately, professional and practiced. Behind them, moving with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never once in his life worried about being caught, came Viktor Petrov. He looked exactly like his photos. Heavy-set, gray-bearded. Fur coats, despite the weather, like the cold, were something that happened to other people. His small pale eyes swept the rooftop and landed on Amara with a satisfaction that made her skin crawl. There she is, he said, in accented Korean. My little problem. Simba stepped forward. Petrov's 4 men raised their weapons. Petrov raised one hand, and they held, barely, but they held. Petrov looked at the lion with something between fascination and calculation. Tranquilizer, he said quietly, and one of his men shifted his weapon. If that dart leaves that gun, Amara said, very clearly, I will not call him back. Do you understand me? You can't control a wild animal, Petrov said. He's not wild, Amara said. He's angry. There's a difference. Wild animals act on instinct. Angry ones act on purpose. Simba's growl rolled across the rooftop like distant thunder. His eyes were locked on Petrov with an intelligence that made 2 of the 4 armed men take an involuntary step backward. Petrov looked past Amara to Jean. Something shifted in his expression, not fear, but recalculation. Park Jin-Ho. You've involved yourself in something that has nothing to do with you. You came to my building, Jean said simply. That makes it my business. Step aside. Give me the girl and her data. Whatever she's offered you, I'll double it. She hasn't offered me anything, Jean said. Petrov's eyes narrowed. Then why? Because, Jean said, and his voice was quiet and final as a door closing. She asked me to help. And I chose to. Amara looked at him quickly. He didn't look back at her. But something in her chest moved, shifted, like furniture being rearranged in a room she'd lived in for years. What happened next happened in about 11 seconds, and it went like this. Petrov nodded to the man with the tranquilizer gun. The man raised it toward Simba. Simba didn't wait. He crossed the distance between himself and the shooter in 2 massive bounding strides, faster than any of them were ready for, and hit the man like a freight train. The gun skidded across the rooftop. The man went down hard and did not get up. Simba stood over him, roaring now, a sound so enormous it seemed to physically push the cold air outward in waves. The other 3 men broke. Not strategically, not tactically. They simply broke, pure animal fear overriding every bit of training they had, and ran for the roof door.
Hoon moved the moment they ran.
She was fast for someone who looked so still. She crossed to Petrov's left before his bodyguard could reposition, and there was something in her hand that Jean recognized immediately as a taser. It made a small, sharp sound. Petrov's bodyguard dropped. Petrov spun around. Jean was already there. He didn't hit Petrov. He didn't need to. He simply stood there, close enough that Petrov could see his eyes clearly, and said one sentence. "It's done, Victor." Petrov breathed hard, through his nose. His small pale eyes moved around the rooftop. No bodyguard, no men. A lion standing 12 feet away, still growling low and continuous. Hoon on his left, Jean on his right. The helicopter engine started behind them. The blades began to turn. Petrov was many things. But he was not stupid. He put his hands up. By sunrise, it was over. Not quietly. These things are never quiet, but it was over. Hoon made 3 calls from the rooftop while Kong zip-tied Petrov's wrists with something he produced from his jacket pocket like he carried zip ties everywhere, which apparently he did. The calls went to people whose names Amara didn't know and didn't ask about. By the time the helicopter landed at a private airfield outside the city, Petrov's bounty on Amara had been quietly erased from every network it had touched. By the time the sun fully cleared the horizon, Petrov himself was in the kind of custody that doesn't involve paperwork or lawyers. What happened to him after that? Amara never asked. She had other things to focus on. The holding facility was a warehouse on the southern bank of the Han River, exactly where Amara had suspected, exactly where Petrov's files were confirmed. They arrived just after 7 in the morning, Jin's remaining crew clearing the skeleton staff that Petrov had left behind. It took 11 minutes. Amara walked through the door first. The smell hit her immediately. Animal musk, fear, and something else underneath it, something that broke her heart a little. The smell of creatures that had been waiting in the dark for a very long time. She moved through the facility slowly, opening crates, checking animals, speaking quietly in the low, steady voice she used when everything else had failed and only sound was left. The snow leopards were thin but alive. The chimpanzees huddled together and screamed when the light came in, and then went quiet when Amara sat down on the floor of their enclosure and just stayed there, still and patient, until the smallest one crept forward and touched her hand. And then she found the cubs. 3 lion cubs, each the size of a large cat, piled together in a crate barely big enough for one of them. They blinked at the sudden light with huge amber eyes. One of them made a sound, small, questioning, the lion equivalent of "Who are you and are you safe?" And Amara sat down right there on the cold concrete floor and started to cry. She didn't make a sound. Her shoulders shook and her eyes spilled over, and she pressed one hand flat on the floor of the crate and let the nearest cub sniff her fingers. She didn't hear Jean come in behind her. She only knew he was there when she felt his jacket settle around her shoulders, warm, quiet, no words attached to it. She didn't shrug it off. 6 weeks later, Seoul was different. Or maybe Amara was different. It's hard to tell sometimes. Petrov's network was dismantled. 12 animals were transferred to 3 different accredited sanctuaries, the snow leopards to a reserve in Russia, the chimpanzees to a rehabilitation center in Cameroon, and the 3 lion cubs to a protected wildlife facility in South Africa where they would, eventually, learn what grass and open sky felt like under their paws. Amara stayed in Seoul longer than she planned. She told herself it was paperwork. Transfer documentation. coordination with partner organizations. All of which was true. Simba knew better. He always did. On a quiet Tuesday evening, Jean found her on the roof of his building. The same roof where everything had ended and somehow also begun. She was sitting on the edge of a low wall, looking out at the city. Simba was beside her, his chin on her knee, his eyes half closed. Jean sat down on her other side. For a while neither of them said anything. The city hummed below them. Hoon called. Jean said eventually. She says your data brought down 2 more trafficking networks. Thailand and Vietnam. I heard, Amara said. She also says you turned down the consulting fee she offered you. I don't do it for money. I know, he said. I just thought it was worth mentioning. Silence again. A good silence. The kind that means 2 people are comfortable enough not to fill every space with noise. I leave Thursday, Amara said. I know, Jean said again. Kenya first. Then possibly Indonesia. There's a situation with orangutans that my organization is monitoring. Sounds dangerous. Most things worth doing are. Jean looked at her. She was still looking at the city, but the corner of her mouth had moved, just slightly. Amara. She turned. He didn't say anything grand. He wasn't built for grand. He just looked at her with those dark, careful eyes, the ones that had learned to notice everything, and said, "Come back." Not a question. Not a command. Just 2 words said by a man who had spent 5 years being the wolf and had somehow, in 6 weeks, remembered what it felt like to simply be Jean. Simba opened one eye and looked at him. Then the lion made that sound, the low, rumbling, almost gentle sound he'd made the very first night, the one that Amara had said he didn't make with strangers. Okay, Amara said quietly. Just that. Okay. But the way she said it meant everything. And that, right there, a mafia boss, a wildlife rescuer, and a lion on a rooftop in Seoul, is where we leave them. Not at a perfect ending. Life doesn't work that way. But at an open door. And sometimes, an open door is the most hopeful thing in the world. Well, if this story moved you, surprised you, or kept you up past your bedtime, please subscribe to this channel to support our growth. Every subscriber helps us keep creating stories like this one. Share this with someone who loves a good story. Drop a comment telling us your favorite moment, and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you for watching. We'll catch you next time. Lion face.